Want to hear my pet theology theory?
All right, let's see it.
I live in the Midwest, which people often call like God's country, but I don't think it is God's country. I think God's country is like New York City and Lagos, Nigeria and Mexico City, Mexico. I'm talking about the Christian God here, because if you read the Christian scriptures, like, God does not spend that much time like waxing poetic about mountains and rivers and lakes and whatnot. God spends a ton of time talking about people.
So this actually resonates somewhat with a theory within the cognitive science of religion that holds that the deities that become the biggest and the most powerful within large societies, the patron deities, are those deities that are most socially, or according to the literature, morally concerned deities. In other words, they're the deities that care most about the societies over which they are patrons and care most about their behavior, and so are willing to observe and enforce social mores. And so in a sense, this is exactly right, that the deities that are considered to care the most about people are the deities that are going to take center stage and become most powerful. And if you want to look at a larger discussion of how this all works within human evolution, a recent discussion is Ara Norensayen's book, Big Gods.
Like, so much that you could argue that people made up God. Why else would he be so obsessed with people? But I'm obviously not going to argue that because I'm a Christian. If you look at the Christian scriptures, I think it's pretty clear that God wants to be where the people are. Like, there was this one time that God became a person, and that person who was God spent like the whole last year of his life trying to get from not the city to the city.
So there's actually a really good case to make for this. However, within the Bible, you see two competing ideals. And on one side, you do have this notion that the urban is considered more divine, more ordered, closer to the heavens. And on a vertical scale, you ascend up to the temple and the divine, which is usually also located at the very center of the city. So on a horizontal scale, you have this concept of center and periphery, where the closer you get to the center, the more organized, the more civilized things are, and the further you get to the periphery, the more unorganized, the more chaotic, the less civilized, and the more dangerous things are. So this is why you have demons and other shadowy figures that occupy the seas and the deserts, where there is no civilization, where God's influence is less, and where things are more dangerous. And so you do have a sense that God operates at the center of order, at the center of civilization, at the center of cities, and that's why the Jerusalem temple is the height of order, of civilization, of the divine. However, you also have another literary layer, and this is more closely associated with the more archaic layers within the Hebrew Bible, where God has more of an ancestral deity feel, and is more agrarian, and is more concerned with shepherds and with rural living. And so a reflection of this might be the idea that Abraham was more righteous and set up his tent as kind of a Bedouin away from the city, in the fields, whereas Lot pointed his tent toward the city and would ultimately dwell within Sodom, which was considered an urban center and might be at the center of why Sodom was considered to be so unrighteous and so wicked. And that would be the preservation of a very archaic, very early kind of idealizing of rural living over and against the debauchery and the wickedness of urban living. So both concepts of God are in there, but I would say that the notion that God prefers civilization and urban living probably wins out in the end as the societies that preserve these texts became more urbanized, became more successful, and became more complex.
Admittedly, it didn't go great for him in the city, but also it kind of did, because it's only because he made it to the city that we get to experience the redemptive power and love of God's sacrifice for us. So yeah, I don't know, man, but I think from all available evidence, God's a city deity.
Two final considerations in support of this thesis. One is that the Bible has been preserved down to us the way it has because it has been curated by individuals and groups that are parts of large institutions within large urban centers. And so there is a bias towards organization, particularly kingship, priesthood, and things that are going to be focused on large urban centers. The second observation is another theoretical framework from the cognitive science of religion that holds that as societies become larger and more complex, and as it's more and more likely that you will interact with and have to trust and rely on cooperation with people you have never met before, you need some kind of social framework that allows for credibility-enhancing displays, ways to communicate through your actions to others that you know the rules, that you are going to be faithful to the social mores and standards, and that you can be trusted. And the constituent elements of what we group together under the rubric of religion today are very efficient and very effective means of doing precisely that. And so where religion is more salient, you are going to be able to have a larger and a more complex society without losing that prosociality, that social cohesion. And there are other frameworks that can perform very similar functions today, but it's largely agreed that human civilization took off with what we label religion as one of the main providers of that social cohesion. So religion, or at least what we label religion, is one of the primary forces of prosociality in the evolution of human societies.